Disney was my first client. Would spend 40 million bucks a year on banner ads all over the internet. So instead of guessing and hoping for the best, they just ran this process to figure it out quickly. And I was like, man, that's fucking genius.
Yeah.
And so I learned how to do that at scale, how the biggest companies are doing that and de-risking their decisions and figuring out what works and how to break through plateaus. And then I just figured I want to do that forever.
Hey, welcome to the Message Market Fit podcast. I'm your host, Chris Silvestri, and if you're new here, this is a show where I chat with B2B SaaS folks in marketing, product, growth, and founders about how they join the conversation already happening in their customers' minds. We dive deep into their thinking, their systems, and their playbooks to see how they empathize with their audience and speak to them in a way that resonates, so they're compelled to take action. Join us and learn how you too can shape your messaging strategy and write copy that truly resonates and differentiates you. I'm so excited about my guest today, Andrew Capland. Andrew is a coach for heads of growth at Delivering Value, a consultancy that specializes in guiding growth teams to maximize their impact. In this episode, we chat about his transition from traditional advertising to growth in B2B SaaS, the power of understanding your customers through their words, and jobs to be done in product and marketing. Andrew shares super valuable insights like how important it is to always experiment and listen to your customers, and how mentorship has shaped his approach to growth and personal development. Let's dive right in. Hey Andrew, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So let's dive right in. So I know that you now coach and advise growth teams, but I also know that you've been working for 15 years with B2B SaaS, companies like Hubspot, Wistia, Postscript. And I wanted to know why B2B SaaS of all things. What do you like about it?
That's a great question, man. I feel like I fell into B2B SaaS. I started my career working at this big ad agency. Like I graduated from college. I was a business major. I didn't want to get into the traditional business, finance, accounting, management consulting. I wasn't interested in any of that. So I fell into marketing and I got a job at this cool ad agency in Boston. And I was doing these big banner ad campaigns for Fortune 500 companies, Disney, and it was my first client, Aflac, Bank of America. And it was cool. Like I got to do a lot of cool stuff, but I was like, I'm such a small cog in this enormous machine. I want to work with smaller businesses. And so I eventually ended up Googling, like, how do I do marketing consulting for small business, and somehow landed on Hubspot.com. And so I ended up working at HubSpot kind of early stage, and that was just who their customers were. I mean, they had a wide variety of customers, but the common theme is that they mostly were software companies of all different sizes building software as a service products. And so I just got a lot of reps at seeing what those kinds of businesses were like, helping them problem solve, seeing the patterns across those. And I always thought I'd probably work with more mom and pops, like local businesses that were trying to figure out like Google Places and things like that. But I liked the challenges that these more mid-sized companies had. I think I learned at scale, what does it look like to help a company grow? How do they problem solve? How do they A/B test? How do they experiment? How do they measure? And then I learned this cool process that I could then take and apply to a smaller business. And at a certain point, that process doesn't work for a really small business or like a local business that has less traffic and things. So I think I was just drawn to the types of challenges that SaaS companies have. And then once I got in, it was hard to get out, man. Like I just kept going deeper and deeper, and the next level unlocked other levels and cool new challenges. And here I am, man, 15 years later.
Awesome. But what led you to working with an ad agency in the first place? For me, I can tell you, so I worked 10 years as a software engineer, and then I stumbled into copywriting just because I wanted something like more flexible lifestyle. I liked the psychology behind it. But what was it for you that attracted you to advertising in the first place?
The action.
What do you mean?
Like, it was two things, right? So one, I graduated college in 2008 when I was probably like someone graduating today. There weren't a ton of jobs. You had to take what opportunities were available and be grateful to have opportunities. So that was part of it. But then I had a family friend who worked at an agency where I did an informational interview. Like I went on site, I wore a suit, because
Mm.
I was 22 years old and like I thought that's what you did. And I went there and nobody was wearing suits. Everybody was running around. People just looked, they were wearing jeans and maybe a button down shirt or t-shirts or whatever. And it just seemed really cool and collaborative. And like, I felt like I was in this beehive where everybody was buzzing
Mm.
around doing something important and they were working with cool clients. And when you get into that world, even today, it's still a little bit of Mad Men. Like you get to go to all the games and all the concerts. And I was like, man, this seems like a fun place to start my career. And it was.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I've always been fascinated, and not only after watching Mad Men, but I've always been fascinated about the advertising world. I've always said if I wasn't working for myself, I didn't have the freedom, and I wanted to work for someone else, it would be for an advertising agency, one of those huge like Ogilvy, BBDO, one of those, just because just like curious about what it's like. What were you
Yeah,
doing there?
it's
Were you
hard work,
writing
man.
copy?
No, I wasn't really on that side of things. I was on, I think my team was media operations,
Ah,
which
okay.
basically, if you boil it down, so Disney was my first client. It was Disney parks and cruises and resort lines. So the goal was to get people to book Disney vacations for their, and to do that, it was 2008. So like banner ads were the main way that they did marketing or advertising online. And so Disney would spend 40 million bucks a year, this line that I was on banner ads all over the internet. And so there was a media buying team.
Mm.
They would go out and they'd say, okay, we're going to buy some ads on yahoo.com and AOL and MSNBC. And we're going to do a homepage takeover on this date. They'd figure out where they want the inventory.
Yeah.
And then my job was basically to take Pluto and Donald and Mickey and Minnie and send all the assets into the ad platform, figure out what URL it should go to,
Mm.
figure out what split between the creative we wanted to run so that we could then get results. And we were A/B testing and doing all that kind of stuff. So a lot of it was like operational work to turn this plan into reality. And it was tough work, man. There's a lot of like technical QA work, a lot of the inventory. If they're doing a homepage takeover on Monday on AOL.com, Monday
Uh,
starts at 12:01 a.m. Sunday night. Technically, somebody's got to get up at 12:01 a.m. and do a quick QA. That was my world for a few years.
wow, wow. It's super interesting. I like the duality of, okay, you got advertising on one hand, which is not super like directly measurable. It's a bit like high up there, right? And then you jump into growth, which is super metrics, KPIs, right? So how do you see, like, what did you learn maybe from advertising, if anything, that you brought into the growth world?
I learned it all, man. That's where my whole foundation of my career started there. Because what I saw with Disney is they didn't know what was going to work. So Disney's big season is the holidays, obviously. And so what
Uh-huh.
they would do is starting in like October, they'd say, hey, we're going to spend 40 million bucks this year. Let's spend $1 million in October and let's try 13 different creative units and 10 different landing pages. And then let's spend 4 million bucks in November and let's whittle it down to the 5 best creatives and the 3 best landing pages. And then let's get it down to the best 2 performing. And then in December, we'll put the rest of the money and really scale this thing.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, that's so smart. Who knows if Mickey would be better than Minnie, or if it should animate or be static, or should it be an animation drawing or a picture of someone dressed up in costume? They didn't know. And they didn't know what copy on the landing page was going to work. So instead of guessing and hoping for the best, they just ran this process to figure it out quickly. And I was like, man, that's fucking genius.
Yeah.
And so I learned how to do that at scale, how the biggest companies are doing that and de-risking their decisions and figuring out what works and how to break through plateaus. And then I just figured I want to do that forever. And I want to help smaller businesses do that to grow themselves. Like it's cool to grow Disney or Bank of America, but I'd rather grow a medium-sized business where I could have a personal
Huge
impact on
impact.
their
Yeah.
success. And so I learned the whole game there. It was cool.
It's nice. So advertising, it's not only about awards then.
I didn't win any awards, not on my team. I think they would go to Cannes though, because
Yeah.
I worked for Digitas, which is owned by Publicis, which is one of those big
Ah,
European agencies that it's a conglomerate. It owns
yeah.
many smaller agencies. But nah, man, I didn't get into any of that stuff.
Nice. You were basically testing, rather than testing jobs to be done, you were testing Pluto, Vicky, all those angles.
Yeah, I
Awesome.
think they had conviction in the job to be done. It was just a matter of what resonated with the folks that were
Yeah.
that they wanted to convert, like what imagery, what design, what copy on those landing pages. And they
Mm,
would just run this process to figure it out fast. And then they
yeah.
would scale with the best answer, essentially.
Yeah. Awesome. So then you go into growth and then you work for HubSpot, Wistia, Postscript, what did you learn from those companies specifically when it comes to understanding customers? Could you name one lesson from each one of those companies?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think with I'll start with HubSpot because that's my journey. HubSpot,
Yeah.
HubSpot, Wistia, Postscript. And so when it comes to really understanding your customers at HubSpot, I really got to talk with customers. Like my job was speaking with HubSpot customers as a consultant. I worked for HubSpot, but essentially I was on the consulting team. And
Okay.
so I got to work with HubSpot customers that had hit plateaus in their growth. And I guess what I learned is the words that customers use are really important. Because a lot of times I knew intuitively from looking at the data, the
Mhm.
challenges that they were facing and how to help them. But the words that they would use would be really important in me convincing these HubSpot customers to implement the changes that I thought would be helpful for them. And so what I learned is how important it is to parrot that back. If someone said, "Oh, I have a lead generation challenge," I'd say, "Hey, great. To solve your lead generation challenge, I
Yeah.
actually think we need to go higher up and solve this other thing first." And they'd be like, "Oh, okay." And if I had skipped that and just said, "Hey, I know you think you have a lead generation challenge, but I actually think you have this other thing," they were less likely to go with me. So I
Mhm.
learned the importance of like really listening and parroting back the right words.
Yeah.
And then at Wistia, I really got to take that one step further and applying those words to jobs to be done. That was the huge takeaway for me there was if you could see the patterns, if you could ask every customer or new sign up a question, you could start to see patterns. And then you could use those patterns to market and activate and onboard and convert them differently. And so that to me was a huge unlock that has become something that I've worked with many companies on.
Yeah.
And then at Postscript, oh man, with Postscript, what I learned is how hard that is to figure out early stage. So at Wistia and at HubSpot, really they had product market fit
Mm.
and we're in scale mode. And the way to scale is really with hyper segmentation and personalization and iteration to break through these conversion plateaus. And that was really cool. But at Postscript, I was going back in time a little bit. They didn't really have the volume to be experimenting and we couldn't get crazy with segments. And so we were more reliant on really speaking with folks and trying to not guess and check, but de-risk a lot of the decisions that we were making without being able to lean on the quantitative results. So
Mhm.
doing a little bit more on the qualitative side.
Yeah. Super interesting, especially when it comes to, yeah, as you said, mirroring those words. And it's even better when you start hearing the same words from different customers, right? That's when you know that it's vivid. It's like it's a thing that if you mirror back on the website or whatever, it's going to work for you to convert people basically automatically.
Totally.
Nice. Yeah, I love that. And especially when it comes to jobs to be done. So we mentioned understanding customers, jobs to be done. What are some of your favorite ways to understand which jobs people are trying to get done?
I like to ask when they sign up for the product or immediately after they sign up for the product as part of the onboarding process
Huh.
with an open-ended question to identify. So for a few weeks, asking some question of, "Hey, thanks so much for creating an account today. Would you mind sharing the main reason why you decided to sign up? Or what's your main goal for signing up?" And doing exactly what you just talked about, getting 500 answers or 1,000 answers, whatever it is, open-ended, let people share what they're going to share, and then going through those answers
Hmm.
and seeing if you can organize them into common themes or answers or what eventually will become jobs to be done.
Yeah.
And then taking sort of the outcome of that, usually you can whittle them down to 4 or 5 common answers and then an other bucket, and then turning that into a drop down or some kind of tile select as part of the future process, and then treating those folks differently. You can treat them differently on the website. You can treat them differently with your marketing campaigns, with your advertising campaigns. But I think the magic comes when you treat them differently inside of your tool. I
Uh,
call that onboarding recipes, but helping folks get from zero to receiving value on their terms starts with understanding what does value on their terms look like, and then helping them get to that point as quickly as possible. And it's different depending what your jobs are and what your goals are.
yeah. And I love that you focus on people who have this experience fresh in their minds, right? Because when you try to ask jobs to be done to people like customers, maybe even your best customers, but have been customers for the past 2 years, they are probably not gonna remember their experience or maybe the main pain or motivation. So when it comes to speaking to maybe more established customers, what kind of data value can you understand speaking from them?
There's so much, right? So I think the two things that are the most helpful for me in my background are, one, to understand, is that value great enough? If the goal of what typically my teams are doing are to get someone to experience that value, is that value large enough that they're likely to convert? And so a lot of times what I'll do is I'll run surveys or speak to customers to ask them, hey, you recently pulled out your credit card and decided to pay for this thing. Would you mind sharing why? What were the features you were excited about? What was the problem that this tool helped you to achieve, whatever that is? And then using the answers to that to customize folks who haven't seen those things. So for example, if I were to ask you and you recently purchased a product that I'm a head of growth for, and I said, hey, why did you buy? You said feature A and B were really interesting, but it was when I really saw when I was able to use the results from this thing, then I knew. And it's okay, great. Now I want to do is I want to find other folks that have your job to be done. And I want to introduce that stuff to them earlier in their journey. It might not be before they activate or experience value or hit that aha moment, but maybe it's part of the retention plan after that, so that I can increase the likelihood that person has the same experience you did and maybe ends up buying. And so those are things that I'm interested in. And then again, I also want to understand how great is the value for them, so that if folks aren't converting, I can detangle. Is it an experience thing, or did they experience everything that they should have and it just wasn't good enough? And I'm being maybe a little direct with that language, but that feedback is super helpful to figure out where should we focus as a team to make this experience better.
Yeah, it's really good. Especially, I'm wondering, in your head, you work with a lot of companies, right? And I was wondering, how do you quickly switch and understand different audiences, different needs, different pains, different jobs to be done between all the companies that you advise? Do you have some practices or, I don't know, some productivity hacks that allow you to have everything in mind?
No, there's no way to have everything in mind. I think a lot of what I get to do is figure out what area needs our attention the most. What is the most pressing problem to solve to help us grow faster? And then figuring out how can we get information to determine how to solve it. And so you can't have everything. Like there's positioning docs and messaging docs and things like that. That's a good artifact to have, but you're always going to want to go even deeper. Is there one job to be done that's not converting as well as others? Are there certain plans that are having higher churn rates than others? Is the rate of growth from plan 1 to plan 2 less than plan 2 to plan 3? Right? There's all these like really micro experiences that you could zoom in on. So I think a lot of my job is just figuring out which of those is worth me zooming in on right now, and how can I fill in any gaps as quickly as possible using a mix of qualitative and quantitative information. And sometimes they're existing artifacts, and sometimes you have to go talk to folks or survey folks or do user testing with folks to fill in the gaps.
Yeah, one thing that always jumps out to me as I go through a lot of research data, at some point you have to make a decision, right? Take a stand for something, because you can't spend a limited amount of time looking at research. So sometimes it's up to you to connect the dots between what people are saying, what you're observing through user testing, and what they actually mean, right? How do you do it? What's your process for you to connect the dots between the research and the actionable steps implementation?
I'm going to answer this by can we talk through like a real scenario?
Yeah.
So let's say we're working for a company that has an acquisition challenge, let's just say. So they have a lot of traffic. For whatever reason, that traffic isn't signing up and purchasing at the rate that they think they should. And maybe there's some benchmark data that sort of confirms that thought and that feeling. And we know that the website isn't converting well. We know that something needs to change. We just don't know what. There's all this research that's done that shows, hey, our ICP cares about this and our persona looks like that, and they work in this vertical with this title, and our website speaks to those things, but it still isn't converting, and now we're not sure what to do. So what I would do is I would go out and the first step I would do would be to put some kind of survey on the website, a little pop-up, a hot jar type experience that says, hey, you're on the website, but you haven't signed up yet. Would you mind sharing what stopped you from taking the next step and signing up for a free plan or a free trial? And seeing if I can get as many answers as possible. If there's a little pop-up on your website, you might only get a handful of answers. So if you don't get enough, the other step you could take there would be to use a tool like winter.com or usertesting.com or conversioncrimes.com. They are all different flavors of the same tool. And find people who look like your ideal customer and show them your page of your website that you're trying to optimize for, and to ask them specific questions. What do you think this thing does and who is it for? What would stop you from moving forward with this plan? What questions would you have that you feel like aren't answered with the experience here, right? You want to understand what the friction points are. Then I would take that information, I would make changes to design and copy. I think those two kind of work hand in hand. Sometimes design can be copy, and other times copy needs to be separate. But I would make changes, and I would basically then do the same thing. I would get more qualitative intel and run more folks through my user test with just a design mockup, ask them the same questions. If there's new answers that arise, great, you can make another iteration on it. If basically they say, no, I don't have any questions, I would sign up, then I'd go, great. I would implement that on the website, and I would probably do it as an A/B test to see, did the things that people tell us actually happen in the wild? And so that would be my process there. If there was a problem and we felt like we were speaking to the stuff that was inside of our positioning document, then I would go out and I would try to identify what the challenges were, what's stopping people from moving forward. I would mock up a design, ask more people based on the mock-up, and then I would implement it and run an A/B test so I could tell if that really solved my problem at scale.
Nice.
That's how I'd connect all those dots.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned user testing and conversion crimes. So I don't know if you know that I've worked at conversion crimes.
No, I didn't know. That's so funny.
Yeah, actually, I actually helped them bootstrap the company. And for that,
Dude, there we go. See, the SaaS world is so small, man.
Yeah,
That's beautiful.
I used to run 1,000 usability tests a month for clients. And that's something that I really found valuable, and that I don't think a lot of people take advantage of, which is usability testing for the front end of the website, not only for the product side,
It's
right?
huge.
And I was wondering, especially in B2B, it's not easy to get the target audience to do usability testing. You can't have a CFO run a quick usability testing. So you can use Winter for message testing, but when it comes to actually run a user testing, how do you do it? Do you do it live on a call with customers or people who resemble the target audience, or how?
I've done it both ways. I have done it live, and what I find live is that people are typically too polite. And they don't really tell you the stuff that you need to hear. They tell you what they think you might want to hear in a nice way. And so I have found that it's better either to send them the questions asynchronously, send them a link that they can review, and then ask them to make me a video back. I find that they're more honest that way. Or to do some kind of user testing with one of the platforms that we've talked about. The downside is that, yes, you can't zoom in on senior C-level folks, like executives probably aren't on those platforms, but the pro is that you get way better feedback. And so if the challenge specifically was that you wanted to get feedback from C-level folks, what I would do is take a bottoms-up approach and say, as filling this out, assume we want people who report to C-level stakeholders, that we need to have buy-in to move forward with this decision. What questions would your boss have, or hesitations would your boss have about this product? And seeing if you can identify some of the things that are likely to happen there or likely to stop them from moving forward there. And that's not perfect, but that's a proxy. Because I find that otherwise you end up chatting with folks who have already moved forward. And so they can't help you identify what would stop them from moving forward because they're already a user. So their feedback isn't as helpful. And then if you reach out to the folks who maybe were users but churned, they don't respond.
They don't care.
My team reached out to 10,000 old users that had churned out within the last 90 days or something like that. And we said, hey, would you mind sharing? This will take you 2 minutes, answer these 2 questions. You can just send us an email back. We got 3 responses. And maybe so once you're disengaged, it's really hard to get anything.
And maybe you offer an incentive and it's not the same thing because then they maybe just want the incentive.
You got it.
I'm curious, do you recommend usability testing to your clients, to your coaching consulting clients? And do you see that they add it to their testing routine schedule?
All the time.
Nice.
Yeah, I recommend it all the time, especially for early stage companies that aren't sure and they're going 0 to 1, especially if they're working on pricing and they're working on a pricing page and they're like, oh yeah, we think this is a good pricing page. What do you think? I'm like, I don't know. It doesn't really matter what I think anyways. Why don't we go out and let's get some real feedback from folks who would be your customers and let's see what they think. And typically it helps you identify the unknown unknowns. And those are the things that stop people. So it's not necessarily maybe the structure of your pricing plan, but the perception of value and how it's packaged And if there's enough information about those features that have really weird names that nobody understands except for you that work internally, helps you to figure out all that stuff that are sticking points.
Yeah.
Helps you to understand what FAQs should you put on those pages. Those are just things that take a long time to figure out. And so yes, user testing, usability testing helps shortcut all that stuff. I recommend it all the time. And I would say 85% of the folks who work with me do it because it's part of the process of figuring out the answer.
Yeah.
When there's not a clear answer and it's not obvious, you need a process to figure it out. And that's a core part of mine.
Yeah. Is it something that they are aware of, or do you first need to introduce it to them as a tool?
As a concept, most of them are aware of it, but they didn't realize how to use it in this use case. So they're always like, oh yeah, I think our product team does that.
Yeah.
I didn't know I could do that here. And so I get that reaction a lot.
Yeah, yeah. When it comes to, you mentioned your opinion, they ask for your opinion, pricing pages. I wanted to get your take on website teardowns, those unsolicited teardowns that like consultants maybe do. What's your take? Are they useful? Are they not useful? Are they opinionated? What do you think?
All the above. I don't know, man. I just feel like conceptually, the idea of a teardown, I hate it. Like, how could anybody from a distance give you feedback on something that you're doing without context, without understanding the constraints or the history there? And I'm guilty of that. I did that early in my career when I thought I had all the answers, and I read all the best practices, and I went to the conferences, and I took all the notes, and this famous person who's very successful said this is how they did it, so this is how you do it. And what I've learned is when you're in-house and you have an opportunity to take risks and try a lot of things, and you try all those things that all the famous successful people said they did, and they don't work for whatever reason at your company because your audience is different, your products are different, your company challenges are different, the history and the context and all that stuff, then you realize the best playbooks are actually contextual. And my job is just to figure out what context do I have here, and then help me to evaluate what playbook might make sense versus just assuming this playbook is the way through. And so that's why I don't love teardowns, is because it just assumes the person sharing the teardown knows the right answer. And if it was that easy, we'd all be way more successful.
Yeah.
And in my experience, it hasn't been that easy. So I think the idea of getting feedback from someone experienced is very valuable. What's more valuable is hearing the process to find the right answer versus what they're guessing is the right answer.
Yeah, and especially if the person providing that feedback prefaces it with saying something, I don't know what type of research you've done. This is the way that I approach looking at the website. You should look for these things. Maybe that can be helpful. And that's the way that I sometimes might do it, right?
Totally. I almost have observed this like very common career arc where there's novices, folks who are intermediate, and folks who are advanced in whatever discipline or career journey you're on. And I find the novices are the ones who say, geez, I don't know, I'm probably wrong. We could try. They always open and soften everything that they come up with. I'm probably wrong, but could be interesting. And then something happens where you get to this mid-level in your career where all of a sudden you think you have all the answers. And those are the folks, especially in the growth space, that are like these ultra confident, loud, they interrupt you with, it's this. And it's like, how do you know it's that, man? And so that's like a very common pattern that I see. And then what happens is when you actually get a lot of experience, you realize, geez, there's still so much that I don't know, and the context is important. And those are the folks who will say, hey, I don't know, but here's how I'd figure it out. Or I don't have all the context, so here's what would be helpful for me to know, and here's a few things to try. And so it's like very interesting how in the middle, you go through this period where you think you're done. And then if you're on either ends, you're in this like ultra growth mindset mode. So
it's a bit like the midwit meme.
What was it?
The midwit meme. It's the one where there's like a bell curve, and basically the guys at the extremes, they are like at the same level. One thinks he doesn't know, the other one thinks he knows everything, but in reality, none of them knows. And then there's in the middle one, like the wise one who actually knows the thing.
That's great. Yeah, that's great.
And I saw that you wrote a post about this, and you actually had an extra point, which is at the end, it says, I'm not sure I want to do this forever. So after you realize that there's so much to learn, the final step is, I'm not sure I want to do this forever. Why is that? Is that resignation or something?
I think something happens where when you're new at something, you're so hungry to learn. and everything is new and exciting and novel. And then when you're in that middle stage, again, you think you have all the answers and you're running from playbook to playbook, and then you get a lot of experience and you realize, yeah, there's so much that I haven't learned yet. And at some point, you need to decide, do I want to continue becoming a master of this craft, or do I want to help other people achieve mastery and shift my focus? And so there's almost like this decision that needs to happen when you become, at least in the growth space, like a really senior, experienced doer, where it's like, hey, the next step in your career is to become a leader. And that actually is moving away from the work and more towards other members of the leadership team at your company. Or you can go very deep. And if you've already got the 80-20 of the mastery, you can gain that last 10, 20%, or try to gain that last 10 or 20%. And that's a decision. And so a lot of folks who I meet with at some point, they just get burnt out of going from early stage startup to early stage company or growth stage company with insane expectations and pressure and hiring, employee onboarding and employee firing. Like at some point, I think that you have a window where you can do that in your career before you need something different in your career. And so that's what I see a lot of, are folks who are at the tail end of that journey, who have achieved some level of mastery, whether it's as a leader or as a very senior IC, and are deciding, can I gear up for another one of these? I know what it's like. I worked at Hubspot. I was there from employee 200 to 2000. Like, I know how that feels. That's crazy. Can I go to another company if I'm lucky and find another situation like that? Oof, I don't know. And so that's what I hear a lot of, are stories like that.
Yeah, interesting. When it comes to your consulting business delivering value, I was wondering how much of delivering value for you it's creative and how much is tracking, measuring data?
Me running my own business or the work that I do with clients?
The work that you do with clients, yeah.
I would say it depends on the process. So the data part of it is typically at the beginning and at the end. So the data helps us to identify, where should we focus? What will give us leverage? What are the problems stopping us from figuring out this thing that we're not getting leverage from? What do we need? What information do we need? What segments do we need to analyze? What cohorts do we need to look at? There's a lot of data there. Then there's typically a creative process, which is, how do we go about solving this? Gee, I don't know. Let's ideate. Let's brainstorm 30, green light thinking. Let's brainstorm 30 interesting things. Then let's comb through those and see if we can model out what would be likely to happen based on our confidence and the potential for impact and how much effort would be involved. And that will help us prioritize. We'll go execute on those creative ideas. And then we go back to the data and analyze, were those thoughts correct? Were these the right creative ideas? Were they impactful? And we use the data as an accountability partner there. So typically it's the beginning and end have a pretty heavy data-driven process. And then the actual solution and ideation is, to me, the fun part. And unfortunately, I never get the good ideas. Like, they always come from other people. And so over the years, I have learned to build the skill of helping surface those ideas and pulling in the right people who do have great ideas and getting really skilled at evaluating ideas to figure out which ones would be our best swings to move forward with.
Yeah.
Because I'm just not a natural ideas guy. I wish I was.
Kind of being the sounding board for those ideas.
Yeah, I used to think about myself as, I want to create an environment to surface amazing ideas from incredibly smart people. And to have them be successful, I need to make sure that it's clear what success looks like for whatever the brainstorm is. And then I need to become extremely skilled at combing through the list, at prioritization, and then holding the team accountable. And that's the environment that everybody gets to maximize their skill set in, at least with me as the team lead.
Yeah. Especially, so when it comes to, expertise, skills, and getting to a certain plateau, maybe. I know that you talk about mentors. So I was wondering, how do you go about finding mentors?
I think it depends on the stage of your career that you're in. And I say that because if you're early in your career, I don't even know if you really need mentors. I think you need role models to show you how to move and operate within whatever environment you're in. Typically those are in-company role models that I think are really helpful. And then you can gain career mastery externally. So like taking courses and going to conferences and listening to talks and things like that, blog articles. I think that's a really good playbook for early career improving. And I think when you get to that mid-level in your career, typically you look for ideally a great manager who can be that mentor for you. It's rare to find. Some folks never find it. A lot of folks get lucky. And typically you get one of these in your career where you have some incredible mentor, a boss who becomes a mentor, who keeps in touch with you for years and years later, who pushed you really hard but believed in you. And that's typically a pretty special person to find. Most of us get lucky. Some of us never get that. And then I think when you get to a certain level, director and above, you look externally for mentorship. And it's actually how I started doing what I do now as a coach and as a mentor, is providing that for other folks. Because I got to a certain point, I became director of growth. And I was like, now I report to a COO or a CEO or whatever. They can't really give me in-role mentorship. And in fact, I'm working for founders who've never really been employees. They've always been founders, and the company's just gotten bigger around them. So they actually can't really relate to what it's like to have to work with a founder and to manage up and to feel nervous to present to them, because they've never felt the way that I'm feeling. They've never been in my shoes. And so that's when I think it's helpful to find coaches, external mentorship, if you can find it, someone who's in your role at another company. And the more formalized the relationship, I think the more beneficial it is. And so that's kind of the role that I get to play now for a lot of other folks who are looking for that person. And so it's been really cool.
How do you formalize a mentoring relationship? Is it actually, hey, do you want to be my mentor?
So if you work with a coach or someone like myself, you pay.
Yeah.
And as part of paying, there's accountability on both sides, right?
Yeah.
You're paying the person, you're holding them to a standard of outcome. And on the flip side, that paid coach or paid mentor is going to ask a lot of you in return, right? They're going to hold you accountable. They're going to ask the things. They're going to give you homework and action items in between sessions. And the next session, they're going to ask you how that went. If you show up to a call unprepared, they're going to say, hey, this is a waste of our time. They're going to hold you accountable. And that's one of the challenges, is if you work with someone, if you just find someone who's in your role at another company, what I found personally is that it's great to chat with that person once or twice, but to formalize it and say, hey, I want to meet once a month at this time. I'm going to send you this thing in advance. You send me this thing in advance. Is that there tends to be a lack of accountability. And that's the hard part, is to see, can you formalize accountability so the meeting doesn't get rescheduled a million times, so that both people show up that are prepared and ready to go, that you've both put thought and preparation into making it a productive session. And it takes two to tango. So I think if you're looking for someone who's not a coach or doing it formally in exchange for money, I think it's just really important to formalize what you're looking for and what you expect, and looking until you find someone who's looking for and expecting those same things in return.
Yeah. And the more you pay, obviously, the more invested you are with the mentor, right? Which is a big push.
Totally. And dude, what's crazy for me is, so I've been on my own 2.5 years. And when I first started, this wasn't a career. Like I made up this thing that I do because other folks would reach out to me and they'd say, hey, could I pick your brain? And I loved it because it was just me sharing things that I'd done or ideas that I had, or they would share the problems that they were facing. And sometimes I'd face those problems too, where I could help them solve them because it wasn't me and I had a little perspective and distance. And somewhere along the line, I said, sure, here's my rate. And I charged almost nothing. I was charging like $50 a session or something for like 2 sessions a month. Like it was nothing. And people would reschedule last minute. They'd show up unprepared. They'd tell me they didn't know what to talk about. And I'd be like, yo, fucking giving away my time here. And like, I'm barely charging anything. And you're not showing up prepared. Like, you gotta be kidding me. And then over time, I've increased my prices because I've gotten more skilled and more experience and whatever. And what I find now is the folks who pay the most always show up. They're always ready to roll.
Easiest.
They're always they're easiest, the lowest maintenance. They apologize profusely if they send me the, my update form 6 hours in advance instead of the 12 that I typically ask for. And so it's funny how that happens. The more accountability you have, typically the better the relationship is.
Yeah.
You see the same in your work?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I started doing some like free sessions on this website called Growth Mentor. I don't know if you know it.
Yeah, I know Growth Mentor. I think I did the same when I was getting started, like in 2015 or 16. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty good to get started. It keeps you in touch with your audience, even though most of them are early stage, so not necessarily my exact type of clients. But yeah, to get started, it's a pretty good platform. But I agree, like totally agree. And I speak from personal experience. I work with a ton of coaches on the personal side, fitness, nutrition, all this stuff. And the more I pay, obviously, I was actually scared of letting them down. So for me, that was a big investment. And yeah, I agree. It's totally worth on both sides to make it a formal agreement.
Something really interesting happens because I work with a coach too, and I've worked with coaches over the years, business coaches, professional coaches. And there's something that changes inside of you when I think you decide, hey, I'm going to pay money and work with this, fitness coach or personal coach or business coach or whatever, where you're saying, hey, I'm leveling up. Like, I'm going to pay real money to work with this person who's going to help me do this thing. the thing I was doing, that's not me anymore. It's actually like the decision to move forward a lot of times is like actually a big part of the transformation. You're like, hey, I'm going pro, and I'm going to have someone sitting next to me who knows what pro looks like. And they're not going to let me just slide if I'm not holding up my end of the bargain. And that's like a pretty cool thing to get that in life, you know?
Yeah. I think you need some of those big jumps every once in a while at regular intervals throughout life.
I totally agree.
Evolve.
Yeah, I totally agree. Otherwise, it's so hard to figure stuff out on your own, you know, because you're so close to it, and it's sometimes hard to see the trends or gain perspective, or even just figure out what's a distraction versus what should you really be focused on. And just having somebody to work through that stuff with is so helpful.
Yeah. Can you think of a lesson from a mentor that made you a better mentor?
Yeah, probably a million. But one that comes to mind is when I was working with a coach and with a mentor. No, it was when I was working with a paid coach for the first time. I used to feel like I was always fucking up. Like I was one meeting away from like getting canned. And even when things were going objectively well, it never felt good to me. So every time I'd meet with my manager and things wouldn't go like super smoothly, I'd be all in my head about it. And so my coach, she'd be like, look, Andrew, you had this meeting with your boss. They gave you a little bit of feedback and you feel this way about it. Let's list out 15 reasons why they might have given you the feedback. And I'd be like, well, because I did this, or I didn't do this, or the last time I did this. And she'd go, okay, great. Let's get those out of the way. Now let's list out 10 more things about what else could be going on. And I'd be like, fuck. Well, you know, maybe they just got some bad feedback from their boss, or maybe the results of the thing that they're working on with this other person haven't been so good. And so they're putting more pressure on me to like kind of carry things, right? You just get out of your own way and you start brainstorming other things. And so after I'd brainstorm 15 or whatever, she would say, which one of those do you think is most likely? And it was never the thing that started with me or I. It was always like there's this other thing. I hadn't even thought about that. That's probably what's going on. And that's something that I do with folks all the time. If they feel like they're in a position where things aren't going well, or they're getting weird feedback, or they're having trouble working with a new boss or a founder or whatever, I go through that exercise with them, and it helps them gain a little bit of perspective and work through stuff. So that's just one isolated example, but there's a ton of those.
Yeah, it's so good, especially when you think about it. It's kind of the same for people when they think about their customers and how they need to message to them, right? If the more, the deeper they think about their problems, their pains, the more they can gain a different perspective and try to wear their shoes in the process. So it's kind of the concept of the Socratic questioning, the 5 whys, right? Like going deeper and deeper, peeling layers. So yeah, that's really good advice.
Right. When you do messaging for the first time, it's like, well, what messaging should we use? Well, we'll just tell them about this and we'll explain the benefits of that. And it's all I focused. But right, when you get out of your own way and you start thinking, what do they really care about? What are they really struggling with?
Yeah.
What's underneath that? Why do they care about that? Why are they struggling about that? Usually the better ideas come from there. You're totally right.
Yeah. Cool. Last couple of questions. What are the biggest challenges you're seeing companies you work with struggle the most in 2024 when it comes to growth?
Right now, there's a lot of companies that are trying to figure out how to balance what they think is product-led growth with sort of a small sales team. It's like the intersection of product-led growth with a sales-led model, or sort of this hybrid model is kind of how I think about it, which is like, hey, we've got lots of customers coming in and buying every month, but we're trying to figure out like, how do we maximize those that self-serve versus those that need to come in that won't buy if we don't have some kind of one-to-one experience, but we don't want to talk to everyone because it's not worthwhile to talk to the folks who are going to pay our small value plans. And how do we run that at scale? So I see that. I think it's compounded because things have slowed down a little bit and companies are trying to figure out, how big of a sales team do we need? Do we need a sales team? Can we go PLG? Does PLG actually work? Is it going to convert in our space? And so I see a lot of these unknowns that are kind of colliding, and it's all on the go-to-market side. And there's less room for inefficiency, I think, with the team and with the go-to-market model in general, because things have slowed down a little bit. And so I see that as a pattern. Like when folks reach out to me as an advisor and they want my help growing the business, not my help coaching or mentoring an individual, it's usually some flavor of that challenge.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, I see. Lately you've been writing a lot about solopreneurship, right? Which is a bit of a jargony term thrown around lately, but I know that you've been doing it seriously. And I was wondering also because it's something that I've been thinking about, so maybe you can give me some perspective. Why staying small, lean, rather than building an agency? What's your reasoning?
When I decided to go on my own, I got great advice from a friend of mine, Wes Bush. Wes is the CEO and founder of productled.com. And
Yeah.
I had known Wes because I ran a mini series on their podcast for about a year and a half. And he was like, hey, congrats on going on your own. He said, I went on my own twice. He said, productled.com is my second business. My first one flamed out because when I started, I said yes to a bunch of things that came my way and I ended up in a job I didn't like. So he said, if I could give you any advice, it would be to define what your ideal life looks like and then hold yourself accountable to that plan and use it as a North Star. I was like, geez, that's incredible advice. And so I thought about the parts of my old life as a director of growth, head of growth that I liked the most and the parts that I didn't like the most. And so the parts that I liked the most typically were helping grow the business and helping grow people around me. Like those are the things that really light me up. The parts that I didn't like were managing people. Like there's a difference between being a leader and being a manager. I loved being a leader. I hated being a manager. I hated giving performance feedback. I hated hearing from other teammates the things I need to work on with my team. I just never was good at it. I always felt uncomfortable about it. And I just decided if I was going to grow my own business, that I needed a break for this next chapter from one, having a manager because I wanted to do my own thing, and two, being anybody's manager. And the third thing was presenting, where I used to get so anxious to get in front of the room and I would get all this feedback like, dude, you're good at it. You're a natural up there, but it never felt good. And so I just decided if I was going to go on my own, those were three components that were important to me. And so I don't do it alone. Like I have a ton of people who support my business. I have an assistant who's incredible. I have an agency that helps with my podcast. I have tax help. I have a writer who supports certain initiatives. There's all these people who support me. But for this current chapter, I just need a break from being somebody's manager. I might come back around on that. Who knows what the next chapter will look like. But for right now, that's why I like the term solopreneur, because it shows I'm building something. I think about myself as running a business, not just me as a freelancer. Like I think it's bigger than that. The way I've structured the business and I've given it a name, it's not Andrew Capland Consulting or whatever. All that was very intentional. I just need a break from being somebody's manager for a little while.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, I'll definitely keep in mind.
Everyone's on their, no judgment, right? Everyone's on their own journey, but that's just what feels good to me right now.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Cool. My last question is, what's the last thing that you've added to your trophy file? I know that you have a trophy file, right, with wins.
I do. I'm gonna pull it up right now. I won't do a screen share because it'll probably be personal. But that's a great question. Let me see if I can open up my Evernote. Oh, of course it's doing an update. Here we go. Let's see what's in my trophy file. And yeah, I mean, this is actually something that I got as a recommendation from a coach of mine years ago, because I found out my brain was so good at figuring out what I hadn't done yet or what I should be doing or what I probably forgot to do. And like, working in growth, that's an asset, right? Your whole job is figuring out things where you should focus and things that aren't performing well so you can get them to perform better. But I was doing that in my career and just feeling anxious and on edge all the time. So she recommended that I start this place where every day I'd look for a few wins. Here's what I got. So I got the last thing in my trophy file is a screenshot from someone named Michelle. I won't say their last name out of respect for their privacy, but they wrote me a personal note, a DM on LinkedIn. I just wanted to thank you for sharing your experience with delivering value. I love the first episode of the podcast that you just made. I've been struggling for the past year in my new role, and those 48 minutes of your show were the most helpful and heart-filling time that I've had since. Thank you for sharing your story and keep up the good work. And that's what I screenshot, and that's what was in my trophy file. And I sent them a note back saying, hey, thanks so much. Like that just totally made my week. You have no idea.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Little things like that, right? That, thank you, or like, hey, I'm watching what you're doing and like you impacted my life. That to me gets me charged up.
Nice. Yeah, I have the same thing. I have this folder called wins on my desktop. Anytime sometimes it's a bit hard to remember. Like when you stumble on something, you're excited, maybe then you forget. But yeah, it's a really great habit to get into.
Totally.
Awesome, Andrew. It's been really good. People can find you you write a lot on LinkedIn. Are you still writing on Twitter? X?
Not really
as
on
well?
Twitter so much. You can follow me on LinkedIn, Andrew Capland, or on Medium, where I've started publishing on Medium, which is
Medium.
media.deliveringvalue.co. You can find me there.
It's a Substack, right?
Yes.
Newsletter and
yeah.
podcast.
Did I say Medium? Yeah. Substack.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much again, and we'll chat soon.
You got it, man. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for listening to the pod. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, the best thing you could do to support the show and help me as a small business owner would be to leave a review. Head over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and let me know what you think. If you don't want to miss future episodes, subscribe, and if you have any feedback, questions, or suggestions for future episodes, just hit me up on LinkedIn at Christopher Silvestri or Twitter at SilvestriChris. Speak to you next time.